I started out in all aspects of the visitor economy, so international education, then tourism, did a brief stint managing the Auckland Convention Bureau back when it was a tinsy little team of just 2 people, and then I got lured into major events. My very first event, my very first event was this one here in 2007. Please admire that utterly dismal design of the program back in 2007. It was very dreary. This was an event that we hosted with 6 months' notice because Fiji dropped the ball, so it was quite an introduction to events for me back then. After that, I moved into event development for the City of Auckland and then prospecting, so thinking about what comes next. And it was there actually that I got my first connection with Scotland. So I'd go to things like Sport Accord, Smart Cities and Host City here in Glasgow many times. There I got to know Paul, obviously, really well, and Stuart Turner. Together we became, as was mentioned, the co-founders of the International Association of Event Hosts. That was how we met during COVID. And after that, I moved on to become the manager of New Zealand Major Events, which is kind of the closest thing that there is to Event Scotland. A little bit more like Wales, though it's more based right in the guts of government. And obviously a lot of things happen when you're in a role like that over 5 years. But if I think about the 3 big bad things that took over my life while I was there, America's Cup is one of them. And if you know anything about America's Cup, you'll know it's always full of political intrigue and challenges, and this one was no exception. Also, the FIFA Women's World Cup bid. Now, some of these photos, by the way, I took that photo. That's why it looks a little bit unprofessional. So FIFA Women's World Cup, probably the most challenging bid that I've ever worked on, but totally worth it when we secured it. And then, not that we want to dwell on this, COVID. And the conversations you've had here, I can tell you we have had exactly the same ones at home. It's really hard to be a sector that lives and breathes on bringing people together when the solution to a global pandemic is to keep people apart. You just, you couldn't get 2 things that were more polar opposites. The one good thing that came out of COVID for us, which clearly from the panel is the same thing that happened here, was it did bring our industry together, and it brought a new understanding of how we might connect better, collaborate, and understand sort of the borders of our industry and the long tentacles that it's got into a whole bunch of other departments and policies and areas of interest. In the last couple of years, I've been working independently as Daylight, including with Stuart Turner. So together we've worked on things like the National Event Strategy for Wales. We're doing some work with Glasgow at the moment. So that lovely connection with Scotland continues, which is great. So today, really, I'm going to try and step back with all of that in mind. I understand why you're talking about a lot of things like your mechanics and your innovation and so, you know, some of the intricacies of stuff like Fair Work, for example. But I'm going to kind of take it back a little bit further and think more about why it is that we are doing our events. Because if you get your why right, then everything else hangs off that. So over the years, obviously, there's been a lot of change in the event space. I'm going to sum up what I think happened in New Zealand and particularly in Auckland, I guess, because it's quite a standard path. I'm realising now that I'm talking to more regions around the world and more countries around the world that there's a pretty progressive path that we all follow. The reason it's good to do that is to think about where you are on that path as a business or as a region or as a country, and also think about where your competitors are as well on that same path. So, there's Wales. I must remember to look down there. So if we start, the very first stage of when you're thinking about getting into major events and international events I'm talking about here, is thinking about just the ability to be able to basically deliver them, right? Just a standard functional ability, capability, capacity, and resource. So right back at the start for us, that was things like the World Junior Roller Skating Champs and things like the World Junior Surfing Champs, which is up here, which Australians won that one as well. We had delivered, obviously, bigger events before that. So we did the Commonwealth Games in 1990. Well, I bet you it was poles apart from the Glasgow Games in 2014. We'd done the first Rugby World Cup in 1987. We'd done previous America's Cups. But as you know, the events industry has just changed. Like in the last 15 years, the expectation, the commercialization, the professionalism that's expected around event delivery, broadcast, the commerce that sits behind it. It's just a whole other game, isn't it? And so we needed to learn how to deliver that kind of next new level of major event. We stepped up pretty quickly to the Rugby World Cup in 2011. And New Zealand has got about the same population as Scotland, right? It's 5 and a bit million people. And when you have an event like Rugby World Cup in a country of that size, it utterly absorbs the place, right? It's big enough to utterly absorb the place. So we needed every hand on deck to deliver that. And because we were still reasonably new, this was a big step change for us. Because we were still reasonably new, we knew where our gaps were, and we imported some talent from Australia to help us out to fill those gaps. And I realise this is a long time ago now, but think about when this happened to you, or if it is still yet to happen, depending on where you sit. We utterly transformed our ability to deliver events off the back of this, our processes, our connections, our funding, and the way that we set ourselves up. So the next thing after that, once you kind of realise that you can deliver almost anything, which is what we learned after Rugby World Cup, actually we know how to do this stuff now, then you have to really start thinking about, well, if I can pick almost anything, I need to be really clear about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And the first why that comes off the first cab off the rank is usually economics. And we've heard about economics today, usually based off visitation. It's heads on beds and bums on seats, right? So that's the first thing that we focus on. Then we start thinking more about media profile might be the one that comes after that. So when we first started thinking about media profile at home, we were thinking more about any eyeballs is good eyeballs. And that's the number that we will measure, that overarching sort of reach that our events have. And then the longer that we were in events, we started to think, actually, it's nice that people want to watch us and want to connect with our place through what they see on telly or broadcast or whatever it might be. But actually, it's really only useful for us, if you're going to be ruthless about it, if those eyeballs belong to a person that has got the ability to convert to something for New Zealand. So that's when you start thinking about which eyeballs belong to people that might one day buy our products based on our brand, might move to New Zealand, might visit us, might study in New Zealand, might invest in New Zealand. And so then the next step after that is you start thinking about other things like business links. So for us in New Zealand, the marine industry, or in Auckland in particular, the marine industry is important, and I'm talking sort of like high-performance yacht design, super yacht refit level of the marine industry. So events like the Volvo Ocean Race become quite important for that. And then, and this is definitely where Scotland has got to, then you start to realise that you can focus on social outcomes and lasting change for people in place. And if you get it right, you also get the economic benefit. So that's a little bit of a full circle thing, really, if you think about it. Because if I think about when I first started in events, I would have probably said to you that it's the local events, which is where you get your community and social benefit. And I'm doing the major events for economics and for media profile and business links and all that big stuff. Now we're kind of realising that these major events can have as much of an impact on social outcomes and community outcomes and what's best for your people and your place, if not more, the bigger events can do that just as much as those smaller events can, if not more so. And so one of the things that I did when I was at New Zealand Major Events was shifted our major events fund to be able to reflect that shift to social impact. So a little bit different to here. What shifts in New Zealand really is the focus of the fund, not the strategy. Our strategy has been around for years. It's pretty much largely unchanged, and it's gloriously broad. It basically says, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, it basically says events can do a very, very long list of wonderful things. A lot of them have been mentioned today already, a very, very long list of wonderful things. They can be small and they can be big, and we, the government, are mostly interested in the big events that have got some sort of international element and reach to them. And that's basically the New Zealand event strategy. So when you've got something that broad, the thing that focuses it is the Major Events Fund, which is the primary tool by which government impacts events. So when I first got to New Zealand Major Events, that fund priority was basically what I would call economics plus one. You must make money for the country, and you must do one other of those useful things on the long list for major events. And when I was there, we moved that away and we shifted to being events that are internationally significant, so still of scale, and celebrating New Zealand culture and building national pride. So they had to do something that reflected us and our place. We narrowed it a little bit further, so if you were creative and cultural events, you had to do something that celebrated our identity and particularly focused on Māori and Pasifika arts and culture. And if you were sports events, you had to focus on high performance outcomes and, not or, and targeted communities or under-participating populations. So that might sound like I'm going a long way down a strategy sort of hole here, but actually strategy is quite fundamental if you think about how that would shift things. So think about a couple of events. One might be, and I'm kind of making this one up, so the World Powerboating Champs, not really, it does exist. The World Powerboating Champs versus the Rugby World Cup for women. So the Powerboating Champs brings in a lot of money, and the eyeballs that watch it are from nations that are likely to trade with us. So important. The Women's Rugby World Cup, at the initial feasibility anyway, it turned out that it did make money, but the initial feasibility for the Women's Rugby World Cup basically said that it was not going to make money, but that it was obviously going to be an amazing lineup for under-participating communities, namely Māori and Pasifika women and girls in New Zealand. So under the old strategy focus, powerboating, absolutely, races in the door, and Rugby World Cup wouldn't even have got a look in. Whereas when you do it the other way around and you swap it and you go to a social impact, powerboating doesn't get off the floor, but the Women's Rugby World Cup becomes an absolute no-brainer. So that shows you how shifting your why can fundamentally change what it is that you secure through your portfolio for national events. So that leads nicely to the women and girls in sport story. So when you're talking to whole nation's events industry, as I am here, it will be a little bit remiss not to talk about what it is that you can achieve as a collective. So let's step back a little bit. So in about 2016, on the horizon, so I was just before I got into New Zealand major events, I was thinking about prospecting at this stage. We had the FIFA Women's World Cup bid on the horizon. So we'd started thinking about it in 2008. By 2016, we had the government money confirmed and we knew that we wanted to bid for 2023. And I'm pretty sure by this stage, if it wasn't confirmed, it was near as damn it that we had the Women's Cricket World Cup confirmed through the ICC rotation. And I sort of thought at this time, well, there's two pretty big events there. I wonder whether or not we might be able to do something more and build more things off the side of it. So think about business events, women in sport, women in governance, women in politics, First Nations women, all that kind of thing. Maybe there are some other major events that we could secure off the back of it. So I thought this was a wonderful idea, but like all wonderful ideas, I hadn't had it on my own. And I discovered as I went around and spoke to other people like the New Zealand Olympic Committee and Sport New Zealand, and at that time New Zealand major events, they had also seen the same thing. So the people that are in those sorts of positions where you don't just see your bit of the jigsaw, but you see more pieces of the jigsaw, could see that there was an opportunity to pull something together. So next step, in 2017, we had a new Minister for Sport and Recreation. Someone whispered this idea in his ear as well, and he said, all right, my number one priority is women and girls in sport. And the first thing I want is a national strategy, which we got, which was this one here, the Women and Girls in Sport and Active Recreation strategy. Back to the whole idea of how important a strategy is. It wasn't just a Sport New Zealand strategy, it was a strategy across the whole of government. So that meant that I, now sitting in New Zealand major events, could call on that strategy as one of the reasons to change my major events fund to allow for greater investment in women's sport. Not necessarily such a strong commercial outcome, but really clearly aligned to this Women and Girls in Sport and Active Recreation strategy. So we also had at the time a bid underway for the International Working Group for Women in Sport. So we hosted that secretariat. If we won it, which we did, we'd be hosting the secretariat from 2018 to 2022. It's the largest network for gender equity in the world. and it culminates in the world's largest conference for women in sport, and that would have taken place in 2022. The UK is actually hosting that now. So we bid for 5 major events in the hope that we would get 3. We bid for the Netball World Cup, didn't get it. We bid for the Women's Hockey World Cup, didn't get it, but we did get the Cricket World Cup for women, we did get the Rugby World Cup for women, and we got the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2023 as well. We propped it up with leverage and legacy allocation off the back of that national strategy. We propped it up with investment in gender-neutral changing facilities, other sort of investment right across multiple pools of government, all coming together under this one single shared aim. So thanks to COVID and some of the FIFA decisions which delayed that time frame for when we knew that we got FIFA, I'm going to say we probably didn't get quite as much as I had initially dreamed. Like I had hoped, for example, that we might be able to do more in the business event space to connect with that women in sport theme or that year of women. But because of the delay, by the time the FIFA decision was made, that sort of window of opportunity had closed for those other business events. But still, certainly we got enough critical mass and momentum to be able to really shift some of the outcomes. So for women and girls in the sport, so we had a shift in media, we had a shift in participation, we had a shift in audience. So we broke attendance records for women's sport, firstly at Rugby World Cup and then again for the FIFA Women's World Cup. 98% of people that went to the FIFA events said that it had increased visibility of women's sport. Our national sporting organisations, we had a leadership shift on our boards. We've got a requirement for our national sporting organisation boards to have at least 40% women, and all but one of our national sporting organisations has already achieved that. Possibly more important, I feel that there's been a shift on the ground. So man and woman on the street, that sort of barbecue chat that you go to, even before people know what I do for a job, I'm going to say that conversation often unconsciously sort of has shifted towards, it unconsciously drifts into women's sport being a point of discussion. These women are now household names, and there's this whole generation of younger people that think it's completely normal that women's sport would be on the same platform as men's sport, and that would not have happened even 20 years ago. So think what's going to happen when that generation grows up. So a real shift of a massive, massive cog. And this is where strategy makes a difference. A shared ambition is what shifts those massive entrenched social cogs when an individual business or an individual event would just have no hope of being able to do it. So for us, it was women and girls in sport. What's yours? And you have the opportunity really to link what it is that you seek the most through multiple avenues. So thinking about funds and bids and different parts of government, different parts of local authorities, business events, major events, strategies, pull it all together. And your part in that as events, I think don't underestimate what power there is that sits behind events. So if you think about business events, the advantage of business events is you can absolutely hone in on exactly what it is that you want, the right kind of content, the right kind of person at the right conference. It's much, much more targeted. Major events can't be quite so specific. It's a little bit more scattergun in terms of, for example, who attends those things, but it's a highly public, visible platform. So why would you waste a highly public, visible platform? You might as well use it to achieve something beyond the obvious. You've got your new strategy now, of course, in the pipeline nationally, and there are other regional strategies underway that will help you to sort of identify what that shared ambition is. So to think about a little bit more about business events as well, because I know that there's a mix of people in the audience here. This is Pia Tamai. It hasn't actually been launched in New Zealand yet. I thought it would have been by the time I was here, so please pretend that you haven't seen this cover page. But this is the National Statement of Strategic Direction for Business Events. It's not linked to just an association, it's for the sector as a whole, and I was lucky enough to get to hold pen on writing this one. And this has ended up as well, not just being about what makes the sector thrive, but thinking about what makes the sector thrive in a way that is also good for people and also good for place. So it's basically avoiding the trap of delivering business events or selecting business events because you can host them, to thinking about what it is that you host because it's good for you and the place in which you operate. So here's a map of New Zealand just to explain. So New Zealand, like I said, is about the same population as here. It's about 5 million people. The land mass is slightly bigger than the UK. Only 1 million of those people live in the South Island. So it's quite, it's not very densely populated, let us say that. And if you think of this part down on the west coast of the South Island, this is it takes about 6 hours, say, to drive from the top to the bottom of that yellow part on the west coast. There's only really one road in and one road out. So the reason I'm talking about the west coast is because what you need to use business events for in a place varies very much by the place itself. So for the West Coast, in summer, it gets some visitation through there off the back of international visitors. In winter, that completely dies away. And so if you can't sustain businesses through such an extreme peak and trough, then you also can't sustain communities. And so if I think about what a place like the West Coast needs in New Zealand for business events, it really is just any conference. Please, we need something in winter because business events is a great way to offset seasonality to help us to sustain our businesses. So that really does show the connection between, for a place like the West Coast, where the intersection happens between what you can achieve through business events, through major events, and through broader tourism. You pull it all together and you find a way to make that community able to sustain itself. In other places, obviously, what you can achieve through business events that's good for your place shifts. So this map is in Māori, by the way. I thought you might appreciate that. But in the South Island, Christchurch, Ōtautahi, Christchurch, an example of one of the things that they've identified as a need through business events, they've got a focus on aerospace as a sector. They've got a national summit aerospace conference that they host there. At the moment, it's largely domestic. They've just set themselves up with a 5-year growth plan to become the Australasian Aerospace Summit event, and ideally also one that grows across the Asia Pacific. So that is what their need is for their place off the back of business events. So there's a potential to achieve a lot more. I asked an operator at home, in fact, I asked a lot of them because I spoke to 45 different stakeholders in the racing of Piatamai. I sort of said to them, if you had 2 conferences, a toothbrush conference and a renewable energy conference, and they are otherwise exactly the same other than the content, is one harder for you to deliver than the other? They're like, no, it's pretty much the same, actually. Okay, so that's good. If you knew which one was more important for your place, for your region, or for your country, would you chase the one that was more important? And everyone said yes. And in fact, someone said to me, and I wrote it down, I still get my return, but I've got the added advantage of strengthening the environment in which my business operates. And so that's really the advantage, isn't it? So sport has started to do this as well. I don't have a picture for this one because this came up in conversation last night. Sport has started to do this to see the difference between winning at any cost and also thinking about people in place as part of how sport is operated. So last weekend, just gone again in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, we hosted the Sail GP event. And sorry, I don't have a picture of it, but it's pretty phenomenal to watch. It's basically foiling catamarans on a really tight course, 12 of them at once, and it's utter carnage. They go absolutely screaming along at something like 70 to 80 kilometres an hour and get within a whisker of each other. It's utterly compelling viewing. But one of the things that they've done is they've got 2 podiums. They've got a racing podium and they've got an impact league. And the impact league is what they call basically the podium for the planet. And so they capture each team's work that it does or does not do in the area of the environment, social change, community connection, all those sorts of things. And so if you win on the water, but you absolutely hit the floor on the impact league, the podium for the planet, there's no glory in that win, right? So you have to be able to show that you are doing both. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it, that we've got to that point. So sport has started to realise the opportunity to think about winning, but not at any cost. Business events, we can think about what it is that we want to host, but you'll do it in a way that benefits the environment in which your business operates. And that's true also for major events if we come back to that. Economics has clearly got to be a bedrock because most of the sector is made up of private business. So you can't just function on social good alone. You've got to still get the economics right. But if you view economics in isolation, and this has come up a lot this morning already, if you view it in isolation, then that can be detrimental at worst. It can be a sugar hit if you're lucky. Or if you're extremely successful in economics alone, you can do that to your own detriment by losing your social license to operate. So you've got to get that balance right. So when I removed the economic gate, for want of another word, from the major events fund, to be honest, it didn't require much pushing. Your national strategy that's in the pipeline at the moment, it reflects the same thing. We've heard this morning about the wellbeing economy, EDI, community, fair work, all of those sorts of things, definitely beyond economics. Your UCI champs that Paul mentioned, yes, there's economics in there, but there's also social and there's sustainability. And when I spoke to the stakeholders about Piata Mai, the business events strategy, they basically said we can't just be about making money anymore because long term that becomes quite self-defeating. You've got to bring your people and your place with you. And the work that we did with Wales, I don't know if you know that Wales has got, I can't remember the full name of it, but its short form is it's called the Wellbeing Act. And basically that's identified for Wales the 15 or so things that they have to do that will make Wales succeed from an intergenerational perspective. Not just now, but for the next 2 or 3 generations, what are the things that Wales has got to get right? That's an act, a piece of ledge that sits across every policy decision that gets made in Wales. So they've determined what their why is, basically. What are the fundamental things that they've got to shift? Yes, economic is there, but actually most of it is about people in place. So there's social outcomes as well. So a focus on people in place strengthens the environment in which your businesses operate. And ultimately, that means that you get to see some economic benefit, but you're doing it off a positive base rather than achieving economic benefit off what could perhaps be a detrimental base in the long term. So every region in the world has obviously got its own challenges, and we saw some of those up on the screen earlier. I keep forgetting to change this, sorry. COVID-19 showed us that things can change for all of us really quickly. We've got geopolitical challenges, we've got rising costs, we've got exactly the same issues in New Zealand as you do here. We've got local authorities, governments, businesses and attendees all just creaking under the weight of these increased costs. But at the same time, we've got events that are truly trying to tackle these things like EDI, like the environment, thinking about genuine community and cultural integration, tech that helps us to reach new people in new ways, all this good stuff at the same time. Somewhere in the middle of all that change and all that upheaval, there is an event solution, but the only thing that you know is it's not going to be the same solution as yesterday because the world is just changing around us so quickly. So like I said at the start, we're rightly talking here about mechanics and trends and some of those fundamental things, but don't ever lose sight of stepping back. Don't ever forget to step back and think about your why and why it is that you are doing what you're doing. So when your strategies come out, either nationally or regionally, whatever it might be, absorb them, have a read of them, and see how it is that you can contribute. Because I think with our women in sport focus, an all hands on deck kind of approach that really showed that all hands on deck thing does work. Collective action, and the collective word has come up a lot. Shared ambition, that's come up a lot today. Not just for yourselves, but for your sector and for your people in your place, because that's where long-term growth lives. There is a Māori proverb in New Zealand. Good luck, whoever is writing this. It says, nā tō raro, nā tōku raro, ka ora ai te iwi. And that means with your food basket and my food basket together, the people will thrive. Nice. Foreign language spoken, it was. Excellent. So that's it from me. With your food basket and my food basket together, the people can thrive. If you've got any questions, I'm here all day. I'll be milling about for a drink as long as I'm still standing up after my jet lag from yesterday. So please come up and have a chat. I'm always keen to chew things over and get a different view. And thank you very much for having me. Kia ora.